What's up everybody, my name is Brian and welcome to the Bike City Woodworks channel. Today, I'm going to teach you how to make Kumiko strips using nothing but power tools. So let's get started. One of the most frequent questions I get asked about Kumiko is how I make the strips that make up the patterns. I think people see it as a ton of tedious work, so I wanted to share my process in hopes that it could help somebody. I make my strips using common power tools, a jointer, a planer, and a table saw. This is just one of the methods to make Kumiko, but I find it efficient, consistent, and not too tedious. If you want to see the all-hand tool way to make Kumiko, check out Adrian Prada's video, which I've linked in the description. So far you've seen me jointing my stock. I make Kumiko mainly from basswood, and use other hardwoods as accents. I'll start with 3/4 or 4/4 boards. Anything thicker than that is just a waste of wood. I'll get one edge and one face completely flat and square to one another. The table saw method I use counts on consistent pieces right off of the saw, so it's critical to start with square and flat stock. I'll spend a little extra time at the jointer to get a good result and set myself up for success. After I have all of my boards jointed on one edge and one face, I'll head over to the planer to flatten the opposite face. I'm lucky to have access to the UC Davis Craft Center's 20-inch helical head planer, which saves me a lot of time, but you should be able to do this no problem with a lunchbox planer. Jointed face side down, I'll plane the boards until I get to around 1/2 inch thickness. Thickness should be determined by your project, but 12 millimeters or 1/2 inch is pretty standard for most smaller projects. Now that I have a 1/2 inch thick board, I start cutting the cross slabs. They're the joinery that make Kumiko possible, since they can take the pressure of the infill pieces pushing against them. For square and diamond patterns, cross slabs are cut halfway up the thickness of the piece so two can slot together. For hexagonal patterns, it's different, but that's a video for the future. Let me take a second to talk about the sled you see here. I have a couple of these sleds made specifically for Kumiko. In essence, they're just normal crosscut sleds with the addition of these grooves in the base. The grooves help me cut cross slabs with repeatability in common sizes, and I'll show you how those work in a second. Blade height is pretty important here. We don't want the blade too low that the pieces won't sit flush to each other, but also don't want it too high that there's a large air gap between the pieces. So I'll set the blade to be about half the thickness of the piece, but then raise it a little more. It's better to err on the side of having the blade slightly too high. Now I'm going to use the grooves in the base and a hardwood key to register the cross slabs. This will act kind of like a box joint jig. After the first cut, each of the next cuts will be registered in that key to ensure a consistent frame size. Once all of my cross slabs are cut, I set up for the strips. I move the fence to the blade and set the width with the story stick. This stick has been sized perfectly for the thickness of the kerf of this blade, so it helps me get accurate results every time. I lock down the fence when there is no more gap between the story stick and the tooth of the blade, and now I'm ready to make my cuts. What you see me doing here is pushing a narrow Kumiko strip between the blade and the fence. This doesn't necessarily seem safe, but it can be if you're paying attention. First of all, I use a push stick, and not one of those long-necked ones you get with your saw. I use a block, which provides both downward and forward pressure all the way through the cut. And yes, the push block is getting cut by the blade. I go through a lot of push sticks. Like, a lot. But that's exactly what they're for. Now, you can totally cut Kumiko strips on the table saw in other ways, like with a thin rip jig. If that works for you, use it. It doesn't work for me, so I use this other method. A few other things. I always have my eye on the workpiece at all times. I put pressure on the workpiece toward the fence, but only behind the blade. And I replace the push stick when there's very little area on the heel for pushing the piece through. Above all, if there's some sort of issue with the alignment of the workpiece, I just let the saw eat it. It's just wood and I can always rejoint it. But all of these things help me prevent kickback, and getting my hand too close to the blade. Please, do whatever works for you to keep yourself safe. One final note is the saw I'm using. Yes, I'm using a professional SawStop cabinet saw. But I've also used a job site saw to do the same task. It's just that the cast iron top and the fence of the SawStop produce much squarer, more consistent results for me, so I will use this tool when I can. So that's pretty much all there is to making Kumiko on the table saw. Yes, there's definitely a lot of waste in the process, but it gives you usable strips right off of the saw, which is why I love it. And now, I'm ready to make some Kumiko patterns. Thanks for watching, everybody. If you like these videos, consider subscribing to the channel for more. See you next time.